compelling 1850 painting, Twilight, short arbiter twixt day and night.
What we have here is a relatively early work by one of the masters of the Hudson River School, Frederic Edwin Church. This is Twilight, short arbiter betwixt day and night of 1850. Frederic Church was the most famous student of Thomas Cole, the artist we sometimes talk about as the so-called father of the Hudson River School. He learned that master's poetic approach to landscape, the idea of a higher style of landscape. This early example of Church's efforts to follow Cole is really intriguing. He is making a rather unusual image of the setting of the sun and priming us to think about it in a rather pessimistic way with this quote from Milton's Paradise Lost. The short arbiter twixt day and night in Paradise Lost is when Satan comes to earth bent on man's destruction. So he is already hinting that all might not be right with this scene. I would suggest that we can read this image as an allegory of the American experiment, and that Church was rather pessimistic about the future of the United States there in 1850, with the sense that the Civil War was on the horizon. Some would say that this is an image of the sun setting on the United States in general. George Inness is an interesting and a challenging painter. He is many different artists at different points in his career. Early in his life, he's making images that look like a lot of other Hudson River School landscape painters. Later in his life, as in the case of the Trout Brook of 1891, just 3 years before his death, he comes to this very loose way of handling paint. At the very end of his career, he came to be deeply influenced by the work of Emanuel Swedenborg. The Trout Brook of 1891 is a classic example of his paintings in this vein. Swedenborg taught that everything in nature received what he called an influx from God to continue existing. So Inness tried to bring that concept of everything being infused with that of God, that divine spark that kept it living and breathing and existing in nature.
Whittredge's The Wetterhorn, 1858.
This is a classic work of an American artist abroad. While many artists of the Hudson River School traveled in Europe, Whittredge was an extreme example of this, living in Germany and traveling extensively throughout the continent for a decade. So he was deeply embedded in the European art establishment, especially associated with the Dusseldorf Academy. This is one of the largest paintings he ever made. It's also really unusual that he's included something like a self-portrait down here in the foreground, a man dressed in Tyrolean traditional dress, painting in the middle of this rather harsh landscape.